Hello, welcome to the Sound of Science, the place where we deconstruct unscientific bogus and silly scams. Let's go get them. Hello, my wonderful critical thinkers. Thank you so much for watching. Meet Brian Holdsworth. He's a Catholic apologist, and as such, he is in a religious cult, and he even is actively promoting his cult. But in this video, Brian is going to pretend that he is not in a cult, but everyone else who is not in his cult is in a cult. Now, of course, Brian has to perform some mental gymnastics to arrive at that point. His entire narrative is centered around the idea that those brave people who have left his cult, got rid of the shackles of religious insanity, and now enjoy a life of freedom, are bad. Freedom is bad, and freedom makes you gay. That's what Brian thinks. And Brian thinks that that is even worse. So Brian wants to take away your freedom, and of course bring you back in his cult, and make you return to his Catholic dictatorship, so that you no longer can marry the person you love. I know it's disgusting, but that is about the gist of his video. Now, let's analyze Brian's video to demonstrate how he is trying to get that job done.
Probably one of the most repugnant possible outcomes to the modern, enlightened, and secular mind is to find yourself entangled and captured in a cult.
Yeah, that must feel scary, doesn't it, Brian? Because your Catholic Church, by all common and reasonable standards, is exactly that, a cult, and you are part of it.
But here's the thing. Nobody who finds themselves in that position thinks they're in a cult, which is one of the reasons it's so hard to get people out once they're in.
Yes, Brian, so let me help you with that. You are in a cult. Your Catholic Church shows all the properties of a cult. Charismatic leader, that would be the Jesus character. Authoritarian structure, the Vatican dictates everything. Demand for absolute loyalty. Yeah, the Bible promotes to put non-believers to death, manipulation and indoctrination. How about pastors, teachers and parents telling their children that they will burn in hell forever if they don't obey the God character? Exploitative practices. Do I need to remind you of the thousands upon thousands of examples of child abuse within the Catholic Church? So you're part of a cult, Brian, and you're even promoting your cult.
If you accuse them of being in a cult, they'd likely be just as offended as you or I would.
No, Brian, I wouldn't be offended by that. I would just ask them how my life would fit into the criteria of what a cult is. And what do you know? Nothing in my life meets those criteria. However, everything of your Catholic Church totally matches the definition of a cult. So you being offended by such a remark would be highly hypocritical.
Which raises a difficult question, which is, how do you know you're not in one?
I don't think that's a difficult question, Brian. There's a set of pretty clear criteria that determine what a cult is. I just presented them to you. All you have to do is to compare your Catholic Church to those criteria, but you don't do that. You don't compare your Catholic Church to any of those criteria in your entire video. Why is that, Brian?
Unlike those who are under the influence of a cult, most people today have no clue that they've fallen prey to it.
This is getting pretty embarrassing, Brian. You keep talking about cults as if it is something from another planet. Again, you are in a cult, Brian, and you're willingly and voluntarily promoting that cult and even making money from that cult.
Because worship is whatever we place as our highest good. There will always be some one thing at the top of our hierarchy, the thing we value the most. We can pacify ourselves all we want with comforting notions of our liberation from the superstitions of religion, but as soon as we remove God as the object of our worship, something else will always take his place.
So, now that Brian has started off by completely ignoring the fact that his Catholic Church is a cult, he now starts building part 2 of his narrative, and that is, you are in a cult. The reasoning behind that is pathetic. Catholics worship their supposed God, and people who start thinking and are wondering why we should even believe that this God exists in the first place, they start worshipping something else, is what Brian tells us. No, Brian, that mostly happens within the realm of your own limited apologist mindset. People who free themselves from the shackles of your cult, in most cases, just drop the whole worship thing altogether because they've had enough of it. They just want to continue the rest of their life in freedom, without the thought that a cosmic sky wizard is watching their every move.
Just like members of any cult, modern, secular, non-theistic culture is under the delusion that it doesn't worship anything because it doesn't name the thing it worships.
No, Brian. People who lead a secular, non-religious life are not automatically living in a cult. That is because, in general, their lives do not fit any of the criteria of being part of a cult. People who are not part of your Catholic cult, they just do not obey your high-ranking church clowns. They do not let themselves being forced to go to your church, pray to your God, listen to your preachers, and read your nasty Bible book. Some of us have had the privilege of never being part of such a religious cult. Others liberated themselves from the mental oppression that their religious cult has put upon them since their childhood days. People who are brave enough to do that should be respected and supported. And of course, people who lead secular and non-religious lives do not automatically worship something other than your God. That is a dishonest language trick. I'm an atheist, and I don't care about your Jesus and your God. What I care about is my family and friends. They are the most important to me. I love them, and I would do anything for them. They are at the top of my hierarchy. But in no way do I worship them in the way that you worship your supposed God. Luckily, I don't see my family and friends as undetectable, yet all-present and all-knowing wizards who watch my every move and whose commands should be followed at all time. That is a rather unhealthy power dynamic that can only result in a toxic relationship, which is one of the main properties of the relationships within a cult. It's a pretty sick insult to suggest that non-religious families would work like that.
And remember that the root of the word culture is the word cult. That's because our cultural fixations and our expressions communicate that which we worship, which in our case is sex.
And we all know where this is going. Gay people did it. It's all their mistake. The collapse of society and morality, gay people did it. Brian hasn't said it yet, but believe me, that is going to be his narrative. And what do you know? A homophobic Catholic apologist. What a surprise.
Sex sits in the highest seat of honor in our culture. We assign to it all the highest worth. We place everything else under its priority. We idolize and obsess over it.
Just speak for yourself, you naughty Catholic pervert. You just see some clips of lovely ladies and all you think of yourself is sex. I had an entirely different idea after seeing those clips. My thought was, are they real or AI? We saw the exact same images, Brian, and if the first thing that comes to your mind is sex, then maybe you are the one being obsessed.
Today, virtually every song is about romantic love or sex. I just quickly searched through the Billboard Top 10, and 9 of the songs were explicitly about romantic relationships.
Oh dear, Brian, songs about love? Did you call the police? Did it traumatize you? Brian, love is the most wonderful thing in the universe. How is that a problem to you? I thought your Jesus character was all about love. What is going on, Brian?
Dating websites earned around $5 billion this year in the United States alone.
Sweet mother of Gandalf. Dating websites? You mean, Brian, people are trying to contact each other online in order to find love and romance. We should do something about this, Brian. Brian, what on earth are you doing here? Other people's love lives are not any of your business. Just leave these people alone and get a life yourself. Why are you so obsessed with other people's love lives? That is the real problem here.
And 90% of boys are exposed to pornography before the age of 18, with the average age of exposure somewhere around 12.
Yeah, Brian, but thousands of them are introduced to sexuality by forcefully ending up on the lap of their Catholic pastor. So maybe it's better for them to find some nudie pics on the internet instead of being physically abused by one of your cult members.
And you really don't appreciate how sexually explicit women's clothing is until you try to dress modestly. I remember when my wife started to be more deliberate about this, as we were further waking up and liberating ourselves from the surrounding culture. But every time she found a dress, it had some compromise to it. It was either short in length, low cut, sleeveless, or compromised in some other way.
Sweet uncle of Frodo, poor Brian, the ordeals you have to go through in your life. Dresses without sleeves. What are you even talking about, man? Is this really what today's Catholic opinion makers see as important problems? Dresses without sleeves? Is this today's Catholic contribution to making this world a better place? Addressing the highly urgent matter of dresses without sleeves.
Because of course, women's clothing are designed to sacramentalize our obsession with sex.
Brian, it seems that this sex obsession thing is mostly your own projection. If I see a woman with a dress without sleeves, there is basically nothing that I think of that, because it's not my business how any woman chooses to dress. And if you would persist that I would think something about that dress, I would probably just think, oh, that fabric has a nice pattern that matches the color of her shoes, or how nice that she's wearing this beautiful dress on this special occasion. And maybe you should do the same, Brian. A nice dress is just a nice dress. Other than that, it's not your business what type of clothing people prefer.
And God help you. If you don't worship at this same altar as everyone else, you will be singled out, re-educated, often formally in our institutions, denounced and excluded. And like any cult, it does not tolerate dissent, even if that means dividing families, even if that means ritual public denunciation. Sure sounds cult-like to me.
Brian, that sounds exactly like what often happens to Catholics who become atheists. Their Catholic family and friends reject them, and sometimes are even hostile towards them. Without realizing, Brian, you just gave a pretty accurate description of how your own Catholic cult deals with those who try to escape from it. Just ask some of the former Catholics in my comment section.
When I was in college, I had the first of what would become many experiences like this, when someone singled me out in front of one of my professors in a social setting because they had heard that I was a Christian and intent on reserving sex for marriage. And both this person and my professor started to just grill me for any opening they could find to persuade me away from that resolution. And why would they do that? Why did it matter so much to them what I did with my own life? It shouldn't, and yet for some reason to them it did.
And Brian, now after all these years, do you finally get the lesson that you could have learned from that incident? The lesson is that your sexuality is no one's business. Those folks at college should be ashamed of themselves and go mind their own business. And that means, Brian, that other people's sexuality is none of your business. Leave them alone. Do not judge them for it.
This is why today it's evolved from not just tolerating every kind of sexual expression, but the obligation to endorse and honor them. It went from tolerating same-sex marriage because it didn't affect you, and this is what happens when you displace God as the object of worship.
So, finally, you're there, Brian. It took you a long introduction of mental gymnastics, inconsistencies, and fallacies to get to your actual point. Gay people did it. By leaving the church, we created an environment in which gay people can now marry each other, God forbid. And no matter that you're still frustrated about a handful of people bullying you in college for your sexuality, you still don't get that you are doing the exact same thing to gay people by degrading their love and marriage for an audience of tens of thousands of people. It's embarrassing and close to disgusting.
Liberalism held that liberty or freedom is man's highest good, that all other moral prescriptions must be subordinate to the freedom of man. That's how we got contraception, then promiscuity, then no-fault divorce, then unrestricted abortion, then pornography, then same-sex marriage. So if you're looking around bewildered at the world that we live in today, wondering, how did we get here? How is our world so screwed up?
I see that you almost have trouble saying the word freedom, because you realize that freedom not only means your freedom to live your life in a religious cult, but it also means the freedom of other people to leave, ignore, or denounce your cult and embrace their identity that your cult has been trying to suppress for centuries. Yes, Brian, freedom means everyone's freedom, not only your freedom. And as most Christian apologists do, you suggest that homosexuality is a moral issue. It's not. Being gay has got nothing to do with good or bad. It's a grave insult to suggest something like that. Being gay has got to do with the basic human right to have your own love identity. The same basic human right that protects you from being beheaded at the town square for not having the right religious identity also protects others to have another love identity than you have. Brian, this is the 21st century. If you and your Catholic cult want to prevent yourself from becoming obsolete in a modern society, you should drop the hate towards gay people and just leave them alone. Focus on real problems. There are enough of them in this world. Same-sex marriage is not one of those problems. Grow up, do the right thing and stop bullying people for their love identity. Thank you for watching.